All right, getting to this hand-wired with the, in my opinion, poorly installed output transformer. So I've got to undo everything. I'm going to be undoing this in just a second. I've already undone the two primaries. And for the center tap over here, let's see. Focus, focus, focus. It's really hard to get to focus on this. Let's see. That just does not look like a good solder joint to me. Well, I'm going to undo that, and later we'll recreate that properly without all this excess. Let me set up the tripod real quick. All right, now I'll move this out of the way. Sorry, it's hard to access things if the camera's there. All right, now one of the issues that the previous guy ran into is that the boards in these things have got lots of lead-free solder, and if you try to mix lead-free and leaded, you get really nasty-looking solder joints. They just don't work well together. So this is a choke connection here. I'm undoing this black wire, and this is the center tap for the output transformer here, this red wire. And when I put those back, I will tend them and get all that nice. But here is the issue. We've got a lot of dirty flux and just general yuck and damage around the board. It just wasn't a very careful application. So I try to get some of that yucky lead-free out so that when I put it back together, it'll have some good solder in there. So I'm going to add some leaded solder to that, because that flux in that will kind of energize everything and help it melt. And I will try to just it out as much as possible. If this doesn't work, then I'll use some braid. You see how it's all gray and grainy? That's what happens when you mix lead-free and leaded right here. It's really hard to do this with the camera there. Okay, that got almost all of it out. I cleaned that a little bit. I know it's in shade right now. You can't really see it. Sorry, there's not much I can do about that. There's all that yuck I'm getting up off that part of the board. All right, so when they overheated this, interesting, I've not had this happen on one of these before, but there's a external brown coating, and here you can see the bare fiberglass. Now it's not cut, so there's none of the fiberglass fiber is exposed, so there's not a moisture issue. Just like there's just a brown paint here. It's just gone from here. Maybe heat that up one more time with a little bit of braid and get a little bit more of that lead-free yuck out. I'm gonna find my braid. Right here in front of me. It's where the best things like to hide. All right, now I can be much more sure of the center tap connection down the road. All right, let's try to undo these secondary connections. I'll neaten all that up later. This one's actually fine, but everything else has to be undone, so I'll redo this later. And I'll get all this old solder off before I put the new stuff on, so we'll know we're not mixing our solders. Now that's everything except the black, and they have that. Going to, oh, it's all covered in stickum. Fun. That's going right here with a bad wrap. It's really kind of crappy, so the easiest way to do this is just kind of snip it, and I'll redo it properly. I'm gonna have to pull these jacks to get the old stuff out. I'll show that later. All right, now I just got to get these 4 screws out. Now I just got to remove these 2 nuts here that are all at weird angles, and then the 2 factory nuts, and drill some new holes to remount this transformer. So I got to run to the grocery store. I'll do that when I get back. All right, back at it. Got the holes drilled for the new locations on the output transformer. My daughter's in the other room watching something on Disney, so if you hear it in the background, that's what that is. This is the hole the previous guy had done through the mounting hardware that came from the factory with these drop my pointer tool, but these nice jagged holes. Here are my new holes. Here's one here and one here. That's the previous guys. It's all jagged. I deburr them, the ones I do. I knocked out the old mounting hardware here and here just so I wouldn't have an issue. That's going to be plenty of strength. This is a steel chassis. So nothing jagged, everything deburred. Time to remount the transformer now. All right, time to put everything back. So I've got some 1/2-inch 8x32 machine screws, stainless steel compression washers, stainless steel washers, and that goes through the mounting flange of the output transformer, through the new hole in the chassis with the stainless steel nylock nut on the other side. Get them started by hand. It's hard to do this upside down with the camera right where my right arm wants to be. All right, there it goes. It's started. And I'll do this for all 4, then resume filming. All right, now this transformer is mounted correctly and securely. Cannot come loose. I'll show the other side. All right, all that is secure. Actually getting good amounts of steel. No jagged edge keeping it from seating all the way. No big honking piece of metal making it go at an angle. You know, you have an expensive amp, you have an expensive new transformer. To me, it's just disrespectful not to install that with care and protect the owner's investment in upgrading the amp. So let me separate the secondaries from the primaries here, and we will begin the fun part of reattaching these secondaries first, because they're the hard ones. First thing I want to do is find my Vupa solder sucker. And get some of this excess solder off here. Not just the excess, but I want to get all the unleaded solder out. May seem like I'm being fanatical by such what seems to be a small thing. It's the connection from the output transformer to the speakers. If anything goes wrong here, at best you don't hear the nice expensive amplifier. At worst, there is no load on the nice expensive output transformer, and bad things happen. That's pretty good. All right, let's take the 8 ohm secondary and put that back in place. Then we'll start the fun working with the 16 ohm and common secondaries. Those need some special treatment that they did not get first time around, but they will get now. So step one, I don't need all this excess. So I need it about there. So snip off the old. Same for the common. And I hate this jacket that they use. It's very correct, but it's really hard to cut. I'll use a razor. It's like the strongest fabric in the world. I've tried different ways of cutting this, and there's just doesn't seem to be a great one. See, it's not like there's a solid piece of wire inside where I can use wire strippers, because I'm afraid I'll nick the copper if I try to do that. And the copper inside, let's see if I can do this. The copper inside is the actual winding of the transformer. It's not brought out in secondary wire. Like it is on most transformers. The Woden clone sounds fantastic. It's a pain in the butt to install correctly. Seriously, is this jacketing made of Kevlar or something? It's ridiculously strong. All right. I do know that once I get to that point, the soldering iron will take care of all those little nylon strands pretty well. Which will make it look like I did a really neat job the first time. But that was a brand new razor blade. Barely made any headway. Neaten this up now a little bit more. That's one. I don't know how much that you could have seen. I guess I didn't aim it very well. I do the same process here on this black common. Maybe I'll have better luck cutting this stuff. I'm going to try something different this time. Kind of going down the middle. I think I might have just figured that out for the future jobs. That's the easier way to do it. So anyone watching this who installs one of these, you're welcome. That is clearly the way to do it. All right, that was much easier. All right, now this stuff, like I said, is the actual copper wire inside of the transformer. And each of these has an enamel coating. And we've got to get that enamel coating off so it'll take solder. So part of that will be abrading that enamel, basically scraping off big chunks of it with that razor blade. The other part of it requires my chassis iron. I'm going to have to get it really, really freaking hot, and it'll burn the remainder of that enamel off, and it'll take solder very well. I'm going to start just with the razor blade. Just get that red off. It's kind of like wiring a pickup. Only in a pickup, you almost never want to remove the red enamel. Here, I have to. You know, these are made pretty much just like the old Wodens, which also have these awful enamel-coated leads. Just if you bought a JMI back in the day, some other schmuck had to do what you're seeing me do right here. And they might have had a tool for it. I don't. But as long as you're patient, this does work very well. And what the razor blade doesn't get, that chassis iron will. The 80-watt iron gets really, really freaking hot. And we'll bond these just fine. Solder, they'll tin all up and be beautiful, man, beautiful. Let's see if I missed any spots. Yeah, big old side. Now, I have tried, I'm sure the questions occurred to people, using something like this. Let's see if it's a 24 or 26. I just haven't been able to get much use out of a set of pliers like this, wire strippers like this. It's kind of in between the sizes I have, and I don't want to nick the copper by putting too much pressure on it. Could actually cut it. So, much of a pain as it is, I think the razor remains the best way to do this. If someone watching this has a better method, believe me, I am all ears. So I am waiting for that 80-watt iron to get hot. Then we will tin these, which will get the rest of the enamel off. Now, the goal would normally be to have both of these through this connection, but the hole is only big enough for one of them. So what I like to do on these, once I get them tinned, is I will wrap this around itself once, and then again, and really get a good connection there. On the common for the negative, I can actually attach it to the jack, both of them in there, and get them really good and tight. But this was just kind of like before it was just kind of like this, with a little bit of solder on there, and the solder wasn't adhering very well because I hadn't gotten all the red enamel off before, and it just looked awful. On some other AC30 models right now, you can actually get both leads through the hole in the switch. But not on this one. So, fun. Iron is now very, very hot. Literally just burning whatever bits of red enamel are on there. You can see it on the tip, that stripe. The brute force approach. Try not to burn myself. That heat travels up that wire pretty fast. You see the pitted metal there where it has rested against the metal frame of the solder holder from a regular solder. The stand from a regular soldering iron. I'll need to get a new tip for this probably in the next month or two. But this amount of heat, which is enough to solder to a chassis on just this small amount of wire, will get the rest of that nasty enamel off. All right. Now what I like to do on those black ones is before I solder, I like to make that into one wire. This kind of really helps the solder do its thing. Tin those together now with a regular iron. That'll also clean off any of the burnt gunk from using the big iron. Get the excess solder off now. All right, that'll go to a ground point. That'd be solid. Now I like to do a variation on that, on this. I do just a couple of twists, just two. And I bring that through there. And if I can do it on camera, I like to do it again. So if there is a mechanical connection before soldering. Give that a little bit of a hook. Go ahead and snip that excess off first. When I solder all that together, it'd be rock solid. And the wire will be soldered to itself and to the switch really well. And if anyone ever needs to redo this down the road if this switch failed, I left enough excess that it could be just snipped and redone. But once this jack is pushed up on it, it's all insulated right. So that gets reattached right here. That yellow wire is stiff, so it's a little tricky to get lined up. Remove the trash can so I don't drop a screw right in it. That has been known to happen. Always get a bit of a trick getting it started, especially with a camera right there. There he goes. I forgot to snip the excess off that yellow wire, the 16 ohm connection at the switch. I'll do that right now before I forget. Doesn't really matter, but is a sharp piece of wire poking out that could easily tear my hand open next time I go down that area. And I'm using a screwdriver here, not a power screwdriver, because these screws that Vox uses are fairly soft metal. And if I were to do it wrong, it'd be easy to strip them out. I want to make sure the switch is working. Yep. All right, now let's do this ground connection. I don't know if you can see it here. I guess not. The old one was poking through here on the old wires. Had two separate wires. One was poking through here a little bit. Didn't have a great solder. The other was wrapped around here with solder on it around this wire, but it wasn't really soldered. I pulled it off with my fingernails. What I'm going to do, I'm going to heat this connection right here. Actually, all right, so they got one bit of bus wire going across all these, and then they have this stranded wire here, which goes to this chassis nut. So I'm going to attach this new output transformer common actually to right here. So to do that well, I'm going to flow a little bit of solder there. It's got that lead-free stuff. And I'm going to suck a bunch of that out. Back in with the braid, I want to get as much of that lead-free stuff out of there as possible so I'm not mixing two different kinds of solder. Like oil and water. Gotta be kind of fast with this because if it gets too hot, the plastic of the jack can melt. Stick this through there. I think I can just force that in. Yeah. There it goes. And once I get it through, I'm going to bend it. Kind of back on itself as much as possible. Get a mechanical crimp on there. I don't know how much of this you can see. Let's see here before I solder it. Well, that really doesn't look very pretty, does it? But it is very solid, and you can see where that solder is up against itself. And then once I slide that jacket up, it'll all be there together. Because the new wire is tinned, it doesn't take a lot to get it to flow. And all those gaps should be filled up. Yeah, that looks good. That's a new good ground. Not the prettiest, but it is solid. Maybe one less thing to worry about. Time to reattach the center tap. And I'm going to remove this old unleaded solder from this other connection here, the other choke wire. Just like we did the first side, which had the choke and the HT center tap. Not HT center tap, output transformer center tap. Sorry. Still processing this morning's coffee. It's not done its full work yet. And again, I just want to get the old stuff out so I'm not mixing dissimilar solders. Now, these choke connections were tinned. I'm not sure if they used leaded or unleaded. So I want to reflow that. So each one has got a bit of shine to it, and I know it's the good stuff. The premise of using lead-free solder in everything is so that lead does not end up in landfills. And I think that is a noble thing when it comes to cell phones and VCRs and toasters and all kinds of things like that, which are inevitably going to end up in landfills. I would posit that certain industries should be exempted from that because the very nature of the conditions inside a tube amp are the very conditions at which lead-free solder is least effective. It doesn't handle the high temperatures very well. It doesn't handle vibration very well for anything that has any mass. You get a cell phone, and not every component in there is the size of an ant's whisker. And, there's no mass stressing that out, and there's no real heat. So it makes a lot of sense. Lead-free solder, great, use it. When it comes to tube amplifiers, which get hot and which vibrate, both in a combo, when the speaker vibrates, the everything vibrates, or when you're moving the damn thing, because they weigh 40 to 100 pounds typically. So there's a lot of vibration and thudding involved as they are transported. So lead-free solder is not as good because all the components have considerably more mass than they do in a cell phone or VCR, Blu-ray player now. The other point being that if the amp is made with leaded solder, the good stuff, I'm using Kester for all this, then the amp is much more likely to last several generations and be in use. And as a result, is much less likely to end up in a landfill. I'm pretty sure that there are going to be relatively few vintage deluxe reverbs in landfills. And that new one they have, the digital deluxe reverb, whatever they're calling it, Tone Master, whatever the name this week is, pretty sure in 10 years most of those will be in landfill. So it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if this amp were built with all leaded solder, I'm using 6040 Kestra, then this amp is much less likely to ever end up in said landfill. Now, I don't want someone to start ranting about tree huggers and all that on my page. I am very much an environmentally aware person, and a lot of people would think that I'm one of them damn lefties. I'm actually right-handed, but I do make my living with and through science, so I guess that leads me to be a bit of a leftist these days. That's all I need to say on YouTube about that, but at least on this channel. But in general, I think everything should be sustainable and reusable, and not put lead and other similar yucks into landfill or into water. But when it comes to tube amps specifically, and I think the people who do satellite telecommunications would like to have some exemptions as well for the same kinds of reasons of extreme temperatures and pressures. I don't think that what applies to a toaster or a Blu-ray player should apply to a guitar amplifier. Anyway, now I've got good, clean connections with without all the gunk on the board for both choke connections and the center tap for the output transformer. The next thing I need to do, in just a minute, I'm going to redo these screen connections. These grid stopper connections and these screen connections. And I want to make sure that the existing wire down at the output socket is long enough to reach, because I'm going to move the grid stoppers, these, to the tube sockets. And I'm going to move the screen grid resistors here where these jumpers are, because this is a much better place to have that heat away from the tube socket. I can use a larger, higher wattage resistor there, and when it's not just floating on the pin, I don't have to worry about that mess. But these grid stoppers need to be at the tube. So let's look at the tube sockets and see if we have enough slack to do that. All right, will be no issue with the wire reaching for these grids. Then I'm going to desolder them. And we're going to get all that old lead-free stuff out, so when I put the new resistors in, I'll be sure of good connections. And the next issue is these half-watt 100-ohm resistors here. I'm curious if the wire will reach the actual pin 9 on each one, whether I need to replace the wire. It's looking like, yeah, I think I'll be fine. All right, so let's do that. I'm going to do one just to show what I'm doing, and then I'm going to move the camera and do the others. Well, it'll be easier if I do it this way. Interesting that is one of the best mechanical connections in the entire amp, which makes it harder to undo what I'm trying to do right now. So let's see if I can get a view of it. All right. Now, this is also a great example of why I don't like lead-free solder. That stuff just kind of dries to the consistency of a hard toothpaste. I can pretty much, I don't want to do it because I might damage the pin on the socket. I can pretty much just pry that lead out of that old unleaded solder because it doesn't make a really strong connection. There's that. And because I do have enough excess on that yellow wire, let me just snip that. Toss that old 100 ohm, move those out of the way. And just as a for instance, I'll go ahead and remove some solder from the pins where that's necessary. And that one was a little bit bent. Let me straighten that out if I can. Trying to do this without burning the wire. I need to move the camera out of my way. Well, I'll tell you what, it's going to be a lot easier for me to do when that camera's moved. But I'm going to be removing the solder from pin 2 and pin 9 on each one of these. And on this tube and this tube, I'll also be removing the old solder at pin 7, where these primary wires on the output transformer connect, just so that I'm getting good solder connections and not mixing solder. So let me do all that, and then I'll resume the filming bit. All right, that's much better. So we've got the screens going to pin 9 on each one with good, clean, shiny solder joints. All the grids to go to pin 2 are ready once I get the resistors in place, and we'll do that later. And the primary connections to the output transformer are going to pin 7 here and here, and all the old solder is out, so that's nice shiny stuff. It all matches well. That'll all be rock solid. There are some amps companies that will mount a grid stopper resistor from pin 8 to pin 2 so that the resistor is mounted at both sides. And that's got some pros in that the resistor is mounted at 2 connections and much less likely to bend or have any stress on that. But not all EL84s are the same. And if you look at the data sheet for EL84s, these unused pins on some EL84s are actually for internal connections. And best practice is not to use 1, 6, or 8 on any EL84. So I will have the new grid stoppers just kind of going off into the air, like you saw the screens on this a minute ago, which is what they do in Marshalls and a lot of apps. And if I had the budget, and especially if I had a 3D printer, I would have a nice little Teflon insulated terminal here, 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 and here that the resistor is mounted to at the other end. But that gets expensive doing that kind of stuff. So these shall not have that. Anyway, this will be much better than stock, and it won't hurt a thing to have those grids connected off to the side. I'll take off some of the excess too. Anyway, let's look on the main board where those resistors are now. All right, as I said at the first video on this app, they've got the grid stoppers here where they should be at the tubes, and they have the screen grids on the tubes where they should be here. They just got them backwards. So time to fix all that. Just going to get this started because it's hard to do with the camera here.
But it's not just a matter of getting the old stuff out. That resistor that just fell, it's because it wasn't actually soldered into the terminal strip. It was just resting on top. See, that doesn't want to flow there. It's because it's that lead-free stuff doesn't have any flux in it. It's going to add some from time to time. And see, that just fell out too. Now comes the funnest part of working on the AC30 and 15 HW series, the hand wires. I've got to get rid of the old solder inside the terminal strips. Because as you might have heard me mention a few times in this video, dissimilar solders do not mix. And this stuff that's in there does not want to flow because it doesn't have enough flux. So I turn the iron up higher because the non-leaded solder's got a higher melting point. And let's see if this does the job on camera. I got a lot of it, but not all of it. Some of it's sticking out of the thing. All right, once I get the big globs off with the sucker, then it's time to go in with the braid. And each one of these needs this. So I want it to be clean and ready to really be made solid. So that's what each one of these will look like in a few minutes. All right, ready for new stuff. So we're going to get some new bus wire here for these four, which is just going to take it to these outer four, which go to the grid wires. And then here, where they have the screen wires on the outside, we're going to put new 1K. I don't remember if I ordered 2 watt or 3 watt. Either one will be ideal. We'll get that in place, and then we'll move on to more stuff that we're going to change. All right, much better. So we've got the grid stoppers moved to the tube socket, or soon will, and the screen grids have been moved here. Now it's time to remove other things that are not going to make the grade in this amp. I don't like that 25 volt bias cap, output cathode bias cap. I don't like these Sozos. They're too large, poorly installed. I don't like these generic silver micas. And I don't like the values of the stock cathode bypass caps in this amp. They are copying the JMI values, which is fine, but JMI was not making a guitar amp. JMI was making an amplifier for anything that they could sell you. Accordion, bass, keyboards. I like to optimize the low-end response of these amps for guitar. That won't make it anemic. It'll still have flat response down to an octave below the fundamental of a guitar, even if you do drop C or something. But it's not going to have all the flub down at 2 to 20 hertz. That's just wasted energy when it comes to amplifying things. So I've got a bunch of other stuff to remove here, and then we'll start rebuilding it nicely. All right, a lot more stuff out now. But everything that was removed, every one of those, I gotta go through and get the old yucky solder out and get them cleaned and ready for new work. A couple of components have been removed that I will explain later. This amp is getting all new potentiometers and knobs, and it's going to be wired like the JMI with the channels out of phase with each other. A couple other little sweeteners. But I think this video is long enough here, so I think I'll stop right here, and this will be part one of the changes.